David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to chair under your chairship today. Now, we all know the world is becoming more dangerous. We talk about it all the time. We have these conversations here in Parliament. We have them at home with constituents, with family and with friends. But we all know that words and conversations alone will not protect us. We need to make the hard choices now to ensure that the state fulfils its most fundamental role, which is protecting its citizens and its borders. Failing to do so puts the rest of our country at risk. Our NHS, our education system, our markets, our way of life. That's why today's debate is so important, and I am genuinely thankful to my honourable friend from Windsor for bringing it forward, because it goes to the heart of a culture that must change rapidly if we are to stay safe. We must ensure that those countries which pose a threat to our democratic way of life are not inadvertently enabled by structures we have imposed upon ourselves. Madam Chair, organisations that have a role to play in our collective national defence must recognise that investing in defence is both patriotic and necessary. Anything that prevents them from doing so should be stripped away, and I truly believe that this cultural shift must begin in earnest in this place. Now, ESG and its three pillars examine how a company treats the environment, manages relationship with stakeholders and governs itself. And at first glance, that all makes sense. It's easy to see why those pillars send a signal to the markets about an organisation's priorities. But here's the problem. The framework has evolved in a way that increasingly treats national defence as a negative, signalling that somehow that you're a bad actor. Defence-focused investments have been lumped together with industries such as tobacco and gambling, and the member for North Durham added industries such as pornography. How are we in this position? How did we reach a position that we've forgotten that spending on defence and providing deterrence is the foundation upon which everything else we value in society rests? Now, I often speak to my dad about this. He was born in 1942 in Plymouth during the Blitz, a city that was bombed heavily. Some of my dad's earliest memories were being under the stairs, listening to the drone of the Luftwaffe bombs overhead. His generation were the last in this country to experience borders and national security as something fragile and uncertain. And then you fast forward a few generations, this was raised a few times today, and when you speak to young people today, the idea that they might need to fight for what they love is an abstract concept at best. We've lost our emotive memory of war, and that puts us in a precarious position. I also fear that we're drawing the wrong lessons from history. When we mobilised during the First and Second World Wars, we did so with an existing industrial base. Factories could be repurposed quickly, and critical resources were within reach. Closer to home, the lessons from COVID have further muddied the water. The risk of a debilitating pandemic was high on the national risk register, yet it was not given the seriousness it deserved. What followed was denial, then urgencies, and then companies like Dyson switched production to ventilators, and we had to scramble internationally to source protective equipment for our NHS. In great British fashion, we muddled through. But with the risk of international conflict rising by the day, I do not want us to have to muddle through. We all have a responsibility to ensure that the state fulfils its primary duty, keeping our countrymen and women safe. Everything else is secondary. And I do not want to have to wait until we're punched in the face until we react. That's why this debate matters, and it's about practical steps, where the money for increased defence spending comes from, and how we cut the red tape that's holding back our defence industry. We also need to look hard at how we better align the capital allocation industry with defence. Now, we all know that the Chief of Defence Staff came out with a warning of the £28 billion gap between our current resources and defence ambitions, and we must get serious. And concerns have been raised that only a small fraction of recent defence contracts have gone towards weapons and armour, which again are fuelling fear within the defence industry of an effective procurement freeze at precisely the moment we should be accelerating rearmament. Now, the private sector and private capital are not a silver bullet, but they are a major part of the answer. And I know that the government is reported to be exploring public-private partnerships, but these will not progress while markets continue to view defence as unethical or constrained by ESG stipulations. That must change through government contracts removing such prohibitive clauses and through government being seen as a reliable partner where returns can be guaranteed. That means defence spending that matches the rhetoric and contracts awarded at the scale required to meet the growing threats. And it's encouraging to see parts of the defence investment space already working to shift this culture. The UK Private Capital Trade Association has already had a defence working group up for nearly a year now to defence the capital allocation industry about what national deterrence really means, both defensive and offensive, a point that the member for York Outer raised, and why investment must include hard capabilities that keep us safe, not just dual-use technologies at the edges. But we must also be honest about the barriers that remain. So societal pressures and perceptions around defence, particularly under the S pillar of ESG, have led to real reticence. Many high street financing providers maintain restrictive policies towards defence firms, often requiring higher levels of due diligence. Increasingly, investment funds are developing ESG policies that exclude defence under blanket terminology around weapons or nuclear, extending deep into the supply chain rather than acting in a targeted way. These unregulated exclusions are inhibiting defence investment at exactly the wrong time. Now, I acknowledge that work is in progress to address this, and industry has developed initiatives such as the UK Defence ESG Charter and the HM Treasury ADS Trade Body Joint Task Force, and that was again referred to by the member for York Outer, for Strangford and for North Durham. But I do believe that more parliamentary support is needed to help investors understand the realities of the sector and encourage responsible investments. The government too must provide clear demand signals to both industry and finance. And then the outcome of Defence Industrial Strategy and the Strategic Defence Review will be crucial in setting the tone to where, what and how the UK intends to spend with the defence sector. Now, I don't want to fall into the trap of opposing the government for opposition's sake. And I want Labour to do well. I want the Defence Ministers to do well. Because if they do well, the UK does well, and we should all be on Team UK. That's why I'm offering the following comments constructively, and I hope the Minister receives them in that spirit. So my party has done some hard work over the last 18 months, and we've set out clear plans to boost defence spending through a sovereign defence fund up to £50 billion, funded by reallocating existing expenditure currently directed towards costly environmental projects. This would enable the procurement of drones and new technologies at a far greater pace and scale, transforming the capability and lethality of the British Armed Forces. And crucially, it would help deliver the industrial capacity we need here at home. Now, to enable that ramp-up in domestic production, the Sovereign Defence Fund would mobilise billions in public and private funding to overhaul the defence industrial base, and the practical steps that we can do by taking stakes in UK defence startups, investing in dual-use companies and building resilient supply chains, reducing reliance on hostile states such as China. Now, this is a fully funded plan based on repurposing existing government expenditure towards this national priority, and it's comprised of three elements. So first, there's £6 billion that will be reallocated from the research and development budget in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology towards the Ministry of Defence. And as we all know, and that's been touched on again today, that defence innovation has well-known spillover benefits to other sectors, from communications to transport. Second, £11 billion would be ring-fenced from the National Wealth Fund, which will become the National Defence and Resilience Bank, and that funding is currently allocated to a number of non-vital eco-projects, while the remainder would stay focused on that national resilience point with things like water and transport. Thirdly, approximately £33 billion would be mobilised from private finance through the same model already used by the National Wealth Fund, unlocking billions more in investment. We all know that other countries are doing this. So countries such as the United States and Germany are already allocating huge funds for defence and bolstering their domestic manufacturing and technological base. We must do the same, because if we do not, we will become prey to those who do not value our way of life. So the government must act with urgency, match words with action, and help drive the cultural shift that will allow our country to be properly defended. That is why this debate matters so much, and I again thank my honourable friend from Windsor for bringing it forward, and I look forward to working with colleagues across this House to progress this agenda.